Hi, this is Michael Becker, and welcome to this issue of the Identity Nexus. This is a program that brings industry thought leaders that are striving to achieve a personal data and identity equilibrium within society. As we look at all of the forces that are framing the use of personal data and identity in society, such as technology, regulations, people's opinions and culture, commerce and economics and politics, it's imperative that we really talk to these leaders to understand the direction and where the world is going. So with me today is Daniel Goldscheider. He is the CEO and co-founder, if you will, of the OpenWallet Foundation, which is a new organization that has been under wraps and under development for quite some time, but it's officially come out and had its birthday, something like 2 weeks ago, Daniel? Is that about right?
It's birth, yes.
It's birth, yeah. And so with that in mind, I wanted to invite Daniel to have us talk to us about the OpenWallet Foundation, what it does, what its purpose is, and how do we get involved with it. So first and foremost, before we move farther, Daniel, can you introduce us to yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then tell us a little bit about the OpenWallet Foundation.
Sure. Thank you, Michael, for having me. I have a background in private equity, and I created a couple of companies, most recently a company called Yes.com, which was in the open banking space in Germany. We merged that business with another company in the same space, in the identity space. And it was really while I was managing Yes.com that I started to become really intrigued with wallets. And there are a couple of reasons. There are very large companies like Apple and Samsung and Google that are interested in wallets. But there are also folks like the European Commission, for instance, that is really interested in wallets. So wallets are definitely a thing. And I started exploring how they should be created.
And let me pause you right here. So when we say wallet, we don't mean this, right? What we're referring to is what? So, what is an open wallet? Other term I've heard is smart wallet too. So can you explain to us what an open wallet is?
Well, a digital wallet would basically be the digital equivalent of the wallet that you have in your pocket. So just like your physical wallet, with a digital wallet, it's probably something you use to carry credit cards or debit cards or an ID card or a driver's license. I'm driving actually an electric car, and our car key is also in the shape of a credit card. So we'll have that in the wallet, and digital wallets are a great place for car keys. There are also things that you can put in a digital wallet that you'll probably won't be able to have in a physical wallet. For instance, cryptocurrencies or NFTs, or maybe FIDO pass keys, or airline tickets, maybe your university degree, for instance. So fundamentally, I believe that wallets, digital wallets, are an incredibly important piece of digital infrastructure.
Got it. And so essentially, it's like my physical wallet. It's essentially an application, for lack of a better term, that allows me to store, my virtual, let's call it what it is. Even real money is virtual currency. So it allows me to store my virtual currency, whether or not that's, AKA dollars or euros versus say crypto. It allows me to store my licenses, my loyalty program cards, as you pointed out, my, any kind of credential, like a driver's license is a credential. So in that same wallet, I could be having credentials about I've graduated from this college or this university, or I have been employed. This is my employer, and under that I have the authority to do X as being a recognized representative of that company. So any of those kind of credentials in my wallet can be stored there, and then with those credentials and that currency in that wallet, what should I be able to do with all of that?
I mean, basically, I think there is a trend already that folks want to leave, their physical wallets at home. I use my smartphone and my smart watch to pay, and it's great. I don't need to carry physical credit cards or debit cards with me. And you'll see that touch more and more aspects of your life, from payments to car keys to driver's licenses, which are just starting to pop up in digital wallets, all the way to eventually passports that I think are going to be there as well. And of course, wallets played a role with COVID passes, for instance. So everything from health to academic credentials to gaining access to your car or your hotel room or your home, all of that is going to happen in the wallet.
And so, for example, like when I, spent the last hour at the grocery store, I have the whole, grocery store basket up, and then I realize I don't have my wallet with me. Well, actually, I do. I have my phone, and now I can tap my phone and then use. In this case, I'm an iPhone user, so I use the Apple Wallet to then access my credit cards and pay for my groceries. And I didn't actually have to have my physical wallet with me. That's what you're talking about.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yes.
So the idea is we already have wallets, and there's proprietary wallets. You've got Google has wallets. You have Apple has wallets. You've got the good health passes you referred to before, all the standardization for these health passes. So what's the difference between a digital wallet, smart wallet, and this new idea, the open wallet? And I'm assuming there's a significant distinction between those terms.
Well, you mentioned standards. So basically, wallets are based on open standards, right? There are standards for car keys, there are standards for hotel room keys, there are standards for tokenizing credit cards and debit cards. There are quite a few standards for digital versions of your identity card. And those standards really are the bedrock, basically, for anything that you want to do in the wallet space.
And just to interrupt real quick, just so we can talk, like probably one of the preeminent standards is the WC3s, the World Wide Web Consortium standard of HTML. Like without the WC3 standards, we don't have the internet and the web browsing experience, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there is a W3C standard, for instance, in the wallet space called verifiable credentials, which is another World Wide Web Consortium standard. There are other standards like AnonCreds, for instance, or ISO MDL in the mobile driver's license space. But you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, there is basically the foundational layer of open standards. And then you have the actual wallets, right? And some of those wallets come from very large companies like Apple or Google or Samsung. Some wallets come from smaller companies. Some of them come from nonprofits. There are governments that are interested to play in the wallet space as well. Now, we are not interested at the Open Wallet Foundation to create standards. There are organizations called SDOs, Standard Development Organizations, and they're really focusing on standards. And we're not interested to create a wallet either. What we're really interested in is the space between the standards and the wallets, and to basically have a layer of open source software on top of open standards underneath the actual wallets. And there is a great role model for that. You mentioned W3C and HTML, and the role model really is the browser space. And when you think about browsers, really any browser, you have standards like HTML, like HTML DOM, like JavaScript, and then you have the browsers like Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge or the Samsung Internet Browser. Now, all of those browsers use open source software, and they use the exact same open source software, in this case, something called Blink, which is a project of Chromium. And the Apple browser, Safari, is using open source software as well. They're using something called WebKit. And of course, the Firefox browser is using open source software too. So in the browser world, it is absolutely normal that you have open standards. And on top of these open standards, you have open source software libraries. And on top of those, you have the browser.
And just to pause there for, so standards, we do it so that we can have, a common set of repeatable, measurable activities and make it easier for development. Likewise, these open source libraries make it possible for developers to not have to reinvent the wheel every single day, right? They can use common elements to make the development process more reliable and more consistent. Also, too, is my understanding of open source is when the software is open source, it then makes it transparent for like security purposes and how data flows. And so as we're delving into this new world of privacy and personal data control, et cetera, being able to interrogate how these code is working to make sure it's secure and valid, and having more people use it to test it to then help it find bugs and fix things. That's all part of the open source process. Is that not the case?
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head here. So there are some very concrete and obvious advantages. If you and I both want to create a browser or a wallet and we are sharing developers, we're saving money.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's assume you have all the money in the world and you say, Daniel, this is great, but I really don't need to save money. Well, we're also saving time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe you are young enough to say that you have all the money and all the time in the world, but there are other advantages as well. You mentioned security. I believe that open source can be, if there is an active community, open source can be very effective to find really secure solutions. Hopefully avoid security breaches, and if those breaches occur, finding fixes very quickly. But importantly, open source can also play a role in terms of interoperability. Having open standards, of course, is helping, but if you interpret a standard differently than I'm interpreting a standard, we can still end up with solutions that are not really compatible. If we're not just
Go ahead, please.
If we are basically putting open source software on top of open standards, and you're using those core engines, and I'm using the same core engines, we're basically starting from a position of interoperability.
Got it. And there's one more I that came to mind while you were talking, which is innovation, right? Because I could have all the money in the world, all the time in the world, but if I'm a closed house and I'm in my own echo chamber, I very well may not be innovating. But if you open it up into the world, to the creativity of the planet, you really open it up to all of these different minds that can be contributing to the possible, and to what we can do with the world and have available to us.
I think that's an interesting question. I think innovation can happen because a lot of people come together and try to do something jointly. And innovation can happen, of course, also because you and I compete and we're trying to outsmart each other.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do with OpenWallet is to maybe get the best of both worlds. The idea is that we should work together on some of the fundamental guts of wallets, and that this is going to benefit truly everybody. And then, of course, there is going to be a lot of competition in the digital wallet world, also of companies that are using OpenWallet code. OpenWallet code hopefully is going to be in lots of different wallets, from large companies, small companies, nonprofits, maybe governments, and there is going to be competition. And I, for one, welcome this competition. I think this is going to be very useful, but it's equally useful to agree that the guts of wallets is something where it actually makes sense for different entities to work together.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it makes me think of two things. And there's one point that I think is really important. We used examples like Samsung Pay and Google Pay and Apple Wallet. And some of these people listening to that will I'm not as big as those companies. I can't build a wallet. And the reality is, because we have standards and once we have the open wallet, open source solutions, anyone could build a wallet, an individual college student to a small startup to, yes, the larger companies. And to your point, if we then can enable interoperability in the innovation space around that, have it be secure, have it save us time and money, there's so much value for society there, especially in this world where we need to create some sustainability. I think is critically important. This also, and I'll drop this in the comments of our video, but Cory Doctorow, a famous futurist and author, has this wonderful comment and article that he's written about. There are standards, then there is open source, and there's what we'll call interoperability, in the sense that we have these standards and we all have to meet those, and those are controlled and they're defined by organizations like WC3. You then have interoperability, where we agree to work together. And then you have what he calls adversarial interoperability, where I'm going to interoperate with you without any agreement. You're going to interoperate with me without any agreement. And then through that back and forth, we'll make it work. And he thinks that for us to really scale and survive, we need to be able to do all three of those things. And that's what I hear when I hear you talking about the Open Wallet Foundation. That's very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, we believe fundamentally that having open source components is going to be good for small companies, because as you say, If you're interested to play in the wallet space, especially if you're interested to do what we call multi-purpose wallets, wallets that are able to do more than one thing, you have to deal with lots of different standards and protocols, and that's very costly. So we feel for smaller companies, for lots of nonprofits, and even for some governments, having open source components is going to be truly useful. But even if you are a very large company, we believe that it makes a lot of sense to agree to work together with some of your competitors, as well as smaller companies, to create basically common core components.
Well, and going back to the point you said earlier, using the browser as an example, right? You've got the standard, you then have the open source engines that are helping the browser work, but then you really have, it's not just the world of internet, the Chromium browsers, like Chrome or Firefox or the Safari browser, but there are hundreds of browsers out there because we have this ability to do that. And there's specialized browsers for specialized experiences. And that's really what we're talking about, is the OpenWallet app that will be able to sit on all of my devices will allow us to have that plethora of really rich experiences for unique domains that anyone to which anyone can build. So in our last couple of minutes, then, can you kind of just tell us and summarize, what is the OpenWallet Foundation? How do people get involved? And what does it take to participate in this growing community?
So there are really two levels. One level is code. Anyone can contribute code, and anyone will be able to use code from the OpenWallet Foundation. You don't have to be a member of the OpenWallet Foundation, and you don't have to pay anything to either contribute or use code. And this is very important to us. We believe that the OpenWallet Foundation should be a great neutral home for code that anyone can easily use. And we're legally a chapter of the Linux Foundation, but unlike the Linux Foundation, we're not headquartered in San Francisco, but in Brussels, in Belgium. And as a chapter of the Linux Foundation, we basically follow best practices in the open source world. And we hope that OpenWallet is going to be an amazing home for code. So if anyone listening to this is working on code and they are looking for a neutral home for this code, and basically a place to work with others in order to jointly evolve that code, we hope that they're going to consider the OpenWallet Foundation as a home. The other level is really the governance level. And this is something where we are trying to be slightly different than the browser open source projects that I mentioned. WebKit is really dominated by one company. Another company is playing a very big role in the Chromium project. And we are attempting with OpenWallet to marry open source really with open governance, to ensure that the ultimate governance layer of the OpenWallet Foundation is not dominated by one company alone, but by a plethora of for-profit companies, both very large and small, as well as nonprofits. And something which is relatively unique for the Linux Foundation, we also looked at ICANN for inspiration, and we have what we call the GAC, the Governmental Advisory Committee, which is basically attempting to give people working for the government or governmental organizations a seat at the table. Because in our opinion, the best way of looking at open source software for wallets is to try and bring together a cross-section of digital societies, be very diverse in geographical terms, as well as in the industries and the sectors we're trying to attract for the corporate world, and then, of course, nonprofits.
Well, this is just terribly exciting, Daniel. And you're going to be speaking at our May MEF Connects Personal Data and Identity event, which will be talking about identity and all of the flavors of authorization, authority, etc. So, definitely, if anybody wants to meet you in person, they can meet you at our May event in London as well. But thank you very much, and I appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us this great opportunity for what's happening in the market.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, and if people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you? Can they find you on LinkedIn at the foundation? What's the way for them to get a hold of you?
Find me on LinkedIn and go to openwallet.foundation.
All right, beautiful. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.